So who's gonna lead off with that?
Sure. I will start. Tonight I have with us Nicole Town. She is our new communications coordinator. Nicole was our intern for a little bit, and luckily we got to snag her full time. She is a CSU graduate, cum laude, media and journalism. Yep.
Wow.
She got to actually study abroad in Italy. One wonderful thing we love about her, she's written an article for BizWest already on kombucha. And she does have a wicked sense of humor, so make sure you guys get to know her.
Hi, nice to meet you all. I really did enjoy interning. I started in September and then I pretty much went right up to starting full-time in February. I actually designed these technology screens, so that's kind of cool seeing that around the building. I'm really enjoying it. I really think the communications team has been really welcoming and encouraging, and I'm really grateful for that. Thanks.
Welcome.
Hello. On behalf of our HR division, I'm very pleased to introduce Kevin Corlinson. He's our new HR technician. He joined us early February, and he's just hit the ground running, and it's been really helpful, so welcome.
Hi everybody, I'm Kevin, and I'm new to HR. I've been in Windsor now for about 4 years, and I managed the Hearth over there for a while. Yes.
I knew I recognized it.
Yes.
Like, where do I recognize you from?
So I've been around town, but I am excited to kind of make a segue into more of a passion, more of a career for me. I'm doing a master's in psych right now, so I feel like HR is people as well. So, and I think working in a restaurant is lots of people. So
Yeah.
I'm really excited. I'm learning a ton. It's been great working in town, and I have no intention of leaving Windsor. So thank you for having me. Yeah.
Welcome.
Well, I'm here to introduce Leif. I'll first say Kevin's a Jeep guy, so he's A1 in my book. I like that. And Nicole, of course, is supporting the water and sewer and engineering division, so she's really our employee now. So just to point that out.
Uh-oh, there were fighting words there. I don't know.
So your salary comes out of his budget?
Yeah. But I want to introduce Leif Leswing. He started with us on the 18th of February, I believe. Leif's a Colorado native, grew up in Colorado Springs, went to CSU for all you Ram people out there. He's Ram head and the watershed head, so I'm very excited to have him on board and taking over the water stuff so I can start doing other things.
Yeah.
Leif.
John's handed that off and drinking out of a fire hose right now, but we've got a pretty good skill set that I think will help out the town, and looking forward to working here and all the challenges that are gonna come up, so.
Where
Pretty
were
good.
you before? You were in HR?
Oh, yeah.
The only mistake I made is he drives a Toyota. So.
Oh.
I can give John a ride home when he breaks down. Before I worked for Soldier Canyon Water Treatment Authority, or the Tri-Districts, so I worked for East Larimer County, North Weld County Water District, and Fort Collins Loveland Water District. Did that for the last 5 years, so I have a pretty unique perspective on the outside looking in, and can now be on the inside looking back out. So,
Cool. Welcome.
thank you.
Okay, that's everybody.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you.
You don't have to leave.
Leif can't leave.
I'm staying.
Oh, he's staying, all right.
So Mayor, Scott Ballstad's actually out of town right now, so Carlin Malone is going to present this next conference.
Okay. So our next item is the fire department annexation fee waiver. So, Carlin?
Thank you, Mayor and Town Board. The item before you is a request to waive a reimbursement fee that was associated with an annexation agreement. That agreement is, or that annexation is the Cummins annexation, and this agreement was done prior to road impact fee ordinance, and it also refers to Weld County Road 64 being the road for reimbursement, and that's now New Liberty Road. That was in 1997. So the district is asking for a fee waiver, and rather than bring the resolution before you tonight, wanted to get your direction first and then bring that to you after we get that feedback.
Okay.
So if I can kick in a little bit.
Sure.
The agreement is from 2000, it's an annexation agreement, and it said any development that occurs within this annexation triggers a reimbursement to the town for costs that the town incurred in 1997, and it's $38,000 and some change. So the idea here is that we are being asked to waive collection of the reimbursement. So it's nothing to do with road impact, it's just a fee that at that time, the annexing parties agreed to pay whenever they developed. And you fast forward 23 years, and here we are, and it's the fire district.
20, yeah, it's 2000.
Well, plus 3 for 1997. I'm a math genius, you know. So that's really why we're being asked to do it, is that the fire district is proposing this development for their fire station.
Okay.
You bring it up, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, we do have the fire chief here, so I was gonna let him say maybe a few words before we dive into whatever our questions were, and he could add or share whatever.
So as we were doing our due diligence and closing on the property, we were made aware of this Cummings annexation. It's $38,874 or something like that. That's in consideration, not knowing all the history of where that came from, impact fee, past expense, whatever. Just as a fiscal agent of the fire district and our taxpayers on both sides, we just asked if there was a consideration for that. We would certainly appreciate our project, which they're expecting that we underbid what the cost of building a fire station is. Every penny helps for us. I certainly think and believe that the annexation agreement, for me reading it, was somewhat expecting a development to occur. Our single one-off use at that site, it's not for the impact part of it, I guess, knowing that now here today, but we're just looking to see if there's any opportunity for relief, and or if not relief in those dollars, if we do have to do any road improvements to the road deceleration or anything like that, and maybe this could be offset and the other costs, for that work down the road or somewhere to mutually benefit, our community as we're putting and improving our public safety.
So that is your selected site?
That is.
Have you purchased it
We
then?
purchased it and closed on the site at the end of the month,
Oh,
and so we
great.
now own it, and we're.
How many acres did you guys have?
12.94. It just, the way the property ran, it just made sense to grab all that. We'll probably use 2 acres, maybe 3, but most likely closer to 3. And so I stand before you with a plea and a grovel to consider saving our taxpayers that money. Money that's already been spent 20 or 23 years ago, depending on whose math you're using. I'm very clear, if we have to, we want to consider nothing with any cost of inflation on that money. So another 30,000, 20 years later.
You're right, it should be like 50.
But anyway, so thank you for your consideration, and with that, I'll be here to answer any questions.
You had a question, David, go ahead. Or a comment or something.
Well, I guess partly to see if Julian had maybe been involved at all at that time. I was. It seems like an odd agreement to have reached. And I guess if there's a lesson here anywhere, is anyone that asks us to defer fees to a later date, we shouldn't agree to it. Because that later date's gonna look like this.
Right.
But secondly, I think, I'm gonna guess that the anticipation was that it would be development, more of a residential development or something that would produce more revenue for the town. And that certainly is not the case. This is more almost a government function, so I hate giving up fees, and yet I think this is feels like an appropriate situation.
Other questions, Dr. Jones?
There was no designation for that fee back in the day. It wasn't for road. It was just for what?
It was to reimburse the town for expenses the town incurred in improving what is now New Liberty Road.
Oh.
So there was, it's a funny number, I don't know what the source of it was, but at the time of annexation, that's when the town has the most leverage to say, okay, at some point, you need to do this. So I'm sure it was just, we figured at some point there would be residential development rather than governmental development. But yeah, it's a funny number. It probably has something to do with the number of linear feet or some formula. I can't say for sure.
Is that Cummins annexation like the 12 acres, or is it actually a much larger area?
I'm not sure.
Carlin?
You know?
I'm not sure either.
Because maybe we can go hit whatever developers on at least part of that Cummins annexation and say, hey, ooh, it's close to that.
Yeah, we're not amending the, this is an important legal point, we're not amending the annexation agreement. You're just going to be asked to approve a resolution that authorizes Shane to waive collection of the fee from the fire district. You're not necessarily giving up the fee, you're just not collecting it from this developer.
I want to clarify too, to be quite honest, we do want to make sure in the agreement it talks about animals, and 4 peacocks, 1 chicken, and 2 dogs are allowed on the site. So we want to make sure that stays.
Got a hell of
And the
That's
peacock
why you need
farmers
all
don't
12
sell
acres.
for sure.
You need probably keep
Well, they can take the peacock with them.
I move not to waive that portion of the agreement.
That's why they needed 12 acres.
Peacocks like their own.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments, or what are the direction of the board? Moving ahead?
Yeah.
Maybe? Maybe?
Yep, definitely.
Okay.
So we have a resolution for your consideration in 2 weeks.
Wait, Mr. Zaslowski had something else to say.
Hey, sir.
Sure.
And, but therefore?
But therefore.
Notwithstanding the above, yeah. Hereinafter, I'm just curious, I am out of curiosity more than anything, I agree with waiving the fee as to the fire department for sure. But if this annexation agreement applies to a much larger piece of property that was annexed at the time, I don't know what the intent was, or, what if there's an area right next to it that is being developed, with residential, even commercial.
Right, but let me just point out one thing, that when we did this, we didn't have road impact fees, and now we do. And so I kind of look at this as almost like a double dip anyway. And if anybody comes in and develops, they're gonna have to pay into our road impact fund anyway. And so again, this is, I think, our attempt to recoup costs before we had another mechanism. So I would just push the board philosophically. I feel like it's, even if it weren't the fire district, somebody else would come in and say, this feels like a double dip to me. And I would say, well, let's talk to the board about it, because it kind of presents that way. So, I mean, you asked a valid question. I think we can have Ian look at that and see if that provision would carry forward or not, if that would survive. But I just don't know if it's necessary. If somebody else comes in, I think they're gonna still pay us back.
So, are you talking about beyond their 12 acres, or, so
Well,
if they?
probably no, the Cummins annexation was
Right.
100 acres.
So I got it right here for this, sir. The original site says 21.58 acres.
Okay.
And so, and I'm guessing some of that may be some of the oil and gas or beyond that. It's already, there's not much left down that pocket there. So Poudre Heights 2 or whatever that is, part of that area might be right there, but there's not much left. If we've got 13, there's 8 acres left out of what this agreement's doing.
In fact, you could argue you should only have exposure to a pro rata share. Whoever is developed in the other ground.
I'll just, sorry. No, I agree,
That's
I agree with that as
pro
well.
rata share.
Okay.
So with the rest of your 12 acres, are you gonna sell that? What's the?
No,
The rest is-
we have no, I can't speak for the future, who knows, but our initial intent is not to sell anything of the property. But as it goes down, it's got a large drop off. According to Martin, there's probably 5 or 6 maybe buildable acres on this 13 anyway. We're gonna use probably 3 of them essentially. The other 2 or 3 that are left, training facility might end up there, not a burn tower or anything of that nature, won't be back to you for that. We might put a structure on there that we can use for training facilities, but nothing else. So barring, I don't even know if there'd be much of a use for the property as is. This is the old gun shooting, trap shooting, is what was there for HP back in the day, 20 some years ago, or maybe more, and then it was sold as part of this deal or whatever. That's my understanding, the history of the property.
So if somebody were to develop something out there, they would have to pay a road impact fee?
That's right.
Okay.
Anything else? Well, then it looks like we will be preparing a resolution. We have the consensus, so
Thank you, Madam
So,
Mayor.
yeah, we'll see it in 2 weeks.
Okay,
I have another meeting, so I'm gonna step out.
Okay.
Enjoy and good luck tonight.
thank you. Moving on to our next item then would be the NISP IGA concerning Eastman Park wetland mitigation.
Thank you, Mayor and Board. Tonight before you, we're going to talk about the IGA that's proposed. You're all familiar with the NISP project. Part of that project, the NISP itself and its partners need to obtain a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. And basically what it's asking is, within that permit, is that they need to do downstream mitigation within this 42-mile corridor of about 36 acres of wetland mitigation. And you may recall that last year during the capital project, when we were talking about phase 1 of the Riverwalk, I mentioned the possibility. Back then we were talking and just hadn't reached an agreement. And so basically those talks have continued. I did want to thank John and Wade and Ian and Leaf even jumped in at the end to help us kind of get to the finish line hopefully on this project. But basically what the agreement says is we've reached an agreement to allow NISP to do mitigation on 9 acres of Eastman Park South. You can kind of see that in this kind of highlighted section right here. And pretty much what this is doing and working towards is ensuring for NISP and all of the partners, which includes Windsor, and you've got the slideshow here that thanks to John passed out, ensuring that the Poudre River remains healthy and continues to be a working river, but as we continue to use and work it, the whole ecosystem along the river remains healthy. How will Windsor benefit? So we will ensure by doing this project and the other acreage that NISP is working along the corridor to do is ensure that there's a better aquatic habitat, improved wildlife, improved flood resiliency, which I think Windsor will really see in this piece, and enhancing recreational opportunities along the river. And this is where it really ties for us into the Riverwalk piece. Examples of the mitigation, and the big ones that we will see, channel reef configuration, cottonwood regeneration, and creation of wetlands. Those others came from a slideshow that was at the Poudre River Forum a week or two ago, and some other benefits along the river that other communities might see.
Are those cottonwoods? Because I thought cottonwoods as a whole were considered, okay.
So the proposed IGA creates more wetlands for us, cottonwood regeneration. There's a river channel reconfiguration. You really couldn't see it in the one slide, so I wanted to put it out here. So this is the main channel, and so there's a new channel here. So when kind of flood happens in that area, some of that water will be kind of detoured off of the main channel. Trails, nature playground, some signage and access to the river. And then kind of the gist of the IGA, I hope you had a chance to read it. NISP has agreed to pay for 80% of the cost. The IGA references up to $2.5 million on their end, which would then correlate to $500,000 for us. I don't anticipate that. We've had conversations with NISP, probably looking somewhere between $1 and $1.5 million. The dollars that we would have to fund our portion of the project, our 20% come out of the Park Improvement Fund. We've got a very healthy fund balance there, so this would allow that to happen. So that right now this is kind of earmarked within their permit with the Corps. They're waiting for the Corps to issue the permit. Upon kind of your conversation tonight and direction that we get from you, assuming it's positive, NISP will then begin to work on design and hopefully have that done by August, which they also hoping to have their permit by then as well, with the goal of construction later this fall and into winter.
And so, Eric, if you could focus in, because I think the board understands the wetland side, but can you focus in on any of the improvements that would happen here that we plan on doing anyway?
Sure.
So, the master plan?
I'm sorry?
No, I just said the nice master plan.
Yes. So what we were going to do anyway is this kind of about right in here, this trail into the river. Nature playground's probably over on this side. Access, so within the plan we've reserved a quite large area where you can get into the river, get in or take out, or school kids could go in and do some education there. This is a boardwalk trail. And then the trail that peels over here to the bridge going that direction, probably a little bit of this. So they're gonna, by doing that, and then the signage and education that comes with that, this is allowing NIST basically to pay for a lot of that. The other piece that we would have done eventually would be some wetlands in that area, and so this is allowing them to pay for all of that as well.
Well, and then the channelizing, which I don't think we were planning on doing,
We
but
were not.
clearly the town benefits a lot from these
By having
flood
that.
flows. By
Correct.
having this.
Will this look like what they've done by River Bluffs, where they've kind of created a
I would-
floodable area out there?
I would say yes, but I turned away. We initially, even in the original master plan, this will have some benching in it. So it won't look quite like River Bluffs, but similar.
Conceptually?
Yeah, it'll be very similar, not as quite as widespread as what the
Okay.
Bluffs is, but it'll be much more contained area.
So will the flooding damage the improvements that we're spending money on?
No, so what we might see lost would be crusher fine trails, but the boardwalk will be designed that we should not see severe damage. The water in that area doesn't flow super hard through it, it just kind of backs up in it.
So there won't be, and if it floods, we just somehow,
Yeah, we'll have to go back and repair some trails, but nothing major.
and then just shut it down during this flood
Correct,
time?
we would shut it down, just like we would intend to do with access to the river for the river walk. And floating is, we'll put up signs asking people not to use the river.
Questions?
Kind of recall that with the last flooding, there was discussion about the channeling, because the river was overflowing, but there was no natural course for it to flow back to the river. So it kept going out wherever the terrain allowed it to go. So I think this is part of the letting the river recover. As the flooding is subsiding, it'll have a natural flow back into the river as opposed to just sitting.
Correct.
So it's good. I did have a couple of questions on the IGA.
Okay.
I don't know if you were ready.
Yeah.
Well, on the cost, Eric, your memo said 400,000, but it does work out to 5. But those are assuming a certain price for the two pieces of work, the final design and the project construction.
That is correct.
Since NISP caps their share, potentially the
At
town's share
2.5.
could be higher if you told the project cost exceeded the estimate.
It could be, I don't anticipate going over at all. As we spoke again at the Blue River Forum, all the estimates that they've kind of conceptually thrown out, I believe will end up in the 1 to 1.5. If it gets beyond 2.5, I think there's some easy cost cutting that we could do to ensure that the mitigation happens. And if that means we're cutting out things like the nature playground or maybe a more expensive boardwalk, that kind of stuff, we can definitely reduce our costs. I do not anticipate going over that number.
The agreement says the town is responsible for securing water rights necessary for irrigation.
John is.
Is that, we already have that? Or is there additional cost?
The GE shares.
I'm sorry?
We already have the GE shares.
Okay, we'll use those. And Ian, I only had an odd question. It's a little almost technical in the wording, but on page 6 of the agreement, which is page 12 of 16 of our handout, it says the term of this agreement, it terminates when the enterprise has met the applicable permit requirements under the 404 permit.
Yep.
But if I remember right, reading earlier, the scope of this project is beyond the permit requirements.
There are monitoring requirements, so assuming the permit requirements are met, then we've satisfied the requirements of this agreement. But there are still ongoing monitoring requirement with the site so that we don't have problems with the permit. So it's tied to how happy the Corps is with the permit.
I guess what I'm asking specifically, on page 7 of the packet, on the whereas, it's one of the recitals. It says that the enterprise is voluntarily agreeing to do additional enhancement that isn't otherwise required in the permitting approval. So, and yet once they satisfy the permitting approval, this contract terminates, under the termination.
The wetlands portion of it would, but the remaining portion, as far as the stuff that we're doing for our, what I would call park improvements, those would remain, those terms and responsibility for those improvements would remain with us indefinitely.
With us,
Right,
but now with NISP.
right. So the wetlands is the NISP part of it.
Correct.
The remaining improvements that we're gonna do that enhance that.
Yeah, the river access, the boardwalk.
The recreational opportunities.
There you go. That would be out. It would stay with, that would remain in our hands for indefinitely. Because all NISP cares about is the wetland improvements to satisfy their permit requirements. We've just fastened some other recreation zones.
And part of this is, I think, our outlook was, okay, we wanna work with NISP, obviously we're a partner, and we understand they need some wetlands, and so we want to work with them, but we didn't want to lock up a lot of valuable parkland and just call it wetlands and not get any recreational benefit out of that, which is why you kind of see what you see, which is, we wanted to make sure that we still had, our public had access to it, but we also saw some big wins for the town. So that's kind of how we ended up here. It was negotiating to make sure we still reserve those things, and so I think the requirements all, if we said, yeah, Northern, we don't care at all about this space, you would have just said, seen a plan to deal with the wetlands, and that would have been it. So every other addition has been kind of, I guess, dusting off our master plan, making sure that we have those amenities, that we can continue to use it. But after they build it for us, it's our responsibility.
I'm sorry, I get stuck because it says Enterprise voluntarily agrees to do additional enhancements not otherwise required. So obviously they're doing something for us that is not part of the permitting process.
Right.
I would have expected the term then to last until those obligations are satisfied, not until they satisfy what they need for their permit. Because what they're doing goes beyond the permit.
Section 9 says that the NISP obligations terminate once their permit, the 404 permit requirements are met.
Right.
So what's left is us, right?
Okay.
But is that what bothers you? Is that the left?
Well, so
It appears that NISP is doing two pieces of work, some that's required by the permit and some that's additional, and they're willingly, voluntarily doing it. When they satisfy the NISP, the permit requirements, this agreement terminates. If they're not done with this other additional voluntary stuff, too bad, the agreement terminated. That's why I thought the term would be until they complete the work as described.
So-
And maybe I'm missing what the scope of work is exactly.
Following that, does that mean that there's a possibility that we would have some additional flood mitigation work to do?
No.
No.
So as far as Dave's concerned, I think it would be easy enough, Ian, it wouldn't be hard to kind of hook this onto the term, right? To just say the term expires, 1, when all the improvements have been constructed for the town, and 2, after all the conditions of the 404 permit have been satisfied. I think we could amend it to add, an additional sentence or 2 that addresses your concern, David.
I was gonna add to that, I think the length of the monitoring, correct me if I'm wrong, Ian and Wade, is at least 5 years. So everything would be installed and then monitoring starts. So I don't see what you'd said in your last statement of that they wouldn't have completed both pieces of the agreement.
Right.
Because the monitoring doesn't start until it's done. And I wanna say it's 5 years, it may be a little longer.
Yeah,
So I think they would have done what they said they're going to do.
So the voluntary stuff they offered to do that will be done long before the regulatory requirements are met.
Correct.
Right, yeah, I can't imagine there being a situation where the stuff that they were doing for us under this agreement wouldn't be done before the term is up. I mean, it's all gonna be done at the front end.
Well, they have to build the boardwalk before they build the wetlands, because you're not gonna go in later and tear out wetlands, build the
Right.
Yeah,
Well, still, so I think we can, everything you
Sure.
guys are saying is right, I think the term is gonna far outlast, which is why we're saying here, but I don't think it hurts to just say, hey, look, we wanna add this additional look in there to just, double cover the town, there's no harm in it.
Well, so do we wanna cover ourselves though on the maximum too? I know Eric is saying it's gonna be far less than the 2.5 or whatever it is, but it does say in here that NISP is limiting their maximum at 2 million. So in the event that it would go over, then that we would have to do that. And I think there
I
should be
don't see
a,
an issue in limiting us in the contract.
I think there should be a maximum that we would be willing to.
But those are our improvements, so.
Well, yeah, but still though, I think, you know, part of the, I think incentive to the board to say, hey, we should move forward with this is the fact that we're getting improvements made on somebody else's dime, so. As far as limiting it, I had two thoughts. One was, you know, we just put in here that they can't go to contract until we've signed off on it. Something that if it's over the amount, if we look and they, you know, they can't just go and sign a contract for $3 million and say, hey, town, you're on the hook for this. So we could do that, and we could just say the town's maximum agreed-to contribution is $500,000. I think those are, either one would work.
I think we just need to protect ourselves too. I mean, you know, we don't know for what will actually come to fruition.
I don't know that we can do it in this contract, of course, because you have one party saying I'm limited and the other saying so am I. Then what? Then if the cost goes higher.
Well, then I think it's back to what Eric said, which is like, okay, let's look at the boards we have for the board block. You know, instead of doing teak, let's do, you know, I hope we don't have teak.
I think this is more probably our authorization, in a sense, the board telling you guys, as you piece this deal together, your cap is 500. If it looks like you're gonna have to go over that, come back.
That's what I was gonna say, not to exceed 500, that's what you.
That's fine.
Right.
And then,
I wonder though, Eric, I'm sorry,
Okay,
but if we should have something in here that just says that, you know, before they go to contract, we get some kind of notice or sign off, because if they're getting dangerously close to that cliff, then we can pull the plug then.
Yeah, and I'm sure that they're good with that. We've had discussions about, as they get into design, even potentially using, and we haven't reached that point yet, but when we bid out Riverwalk Phase 1 later this summer, would they be interested in using our contractor, whomever that might be? And so I think we can build that language in really easy.
Okay, good.
So just one quick point was, it seems like that crossing at 7th for the Poudre River Trail, it seems like to be kind of a weak spot in town, so it seems obvious, but this is obviously where it cuts off Water Valley from Eastman Park and the rest of the trail.
Where it goes
And
under
so
the
this should
bridge.
be, I mean, it seems obvious, but it should, you know, where it goes under the road.
Yeah.
It seems like that floods quite a bit or every year, so hopefully that would, keep that connection open. That's a, but.
I think it's just dependent upon the type of flood we get.
We could always get a bigger flood, but yeah.
As you've seen, I think typically the impact is a month out of the year. Is it typical?
Yeah, exactly. And
typical
hopefully,
flood.
maybe we can reduce that. And then, and I'm on board with this, as long as we can address some of the concerns where we don't have cost overruns and things like that. Have there been any discussions about water storage in Windsor with NISP, like at Frank State Wildlife or?
We have talked about, not water storage, unless John has had conversations with them, I have not. We have talked about other locations for additional wetlands, like the Frank State, like the Oxbow within Eastman Park, and Kodak as well.
Okay.
Because I think, as Shane said earlier, this is an opportunity to use some other folks' dollars to benefit Windsor, and if we can, so that door is open, because if we can get more of that 36 acres that I'd mentioned earlier, I think that's a benefit for us.
Is there anybody else who's got an IGA in place?
I don't know of
Mitigation,
any
or
today.
we're the only ones who are, but they obviously are gonna need
I'm
some.
sure they're working on others, but I think we are the first one ready to sign.
Yes.
So the majority of wetlands mitigation will be at the Glade site, the Lone Dam. And then you have the town of Windsor providing a portion of it, and then the rest of whatever they need will come from a wetlands bank. And so they're just basically gonna buy into this wetlands bank and buy however many acres left that they have.
Yeah. We're fortunate. I mean, this is a good opportunity for us.
I think so.
Of course,
It's a
they
big benefit for the town.
typical.
Did you have any other questions, Barry?
No, that was it. I think the only other comment about the Frank State, there was some talk there eventually if it does turn over to us, it sounds like it will, that, they've taken so much out of there's a potential for a lake there, and if NISP could use it for storage, it could be another opportunity like this to leverage NISP and our needs to do something there.
I look at this as getting some of our money we've already spent towards this back.
Well, we're spending 8.25% of whatever they spend.
Well, I'm sure you all looked through the bills, I'm sure you all looked through the bills we're gonna approve tonight. We wrote a check for 1.65 million, so really, we're, getting it back.
I was gonna say there's a typical government.
You had some questions, Doug?
I think I did, but I think they've all been answered. You talked about irrigation, water, irrigation.
So it's
for
irrigating
what?
the wetlands to get them
Keeping the
started.
wetlands wet?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, that's my main concern.
I'm sorry, Dave, typical government, you did, I went to the punchline.
No, I mean, it'll always say funds, payment can only come from certain funds, right? And we're not obligating anything beyond. The enterprise is saying, of course, we're only gonna pay it out of our funds that we have in the enterprise, which of course is our money. So we're getting some money back.
Yeah, that's a good deal.
So is there affirmation from you all that you want to move forward with this?
So we will have our staff work with their attorneys to make these changes, and then does the board want to see it again in a work session, or are you okay with us making the changes and bringing it back for adoption?
No, I think you understand our concerns.
Really, the only clarification was the not to exceed 500, right?
Well, there's that.
The contract. Understand what the contract.
To see the,
And so you know, if you agree with what Shane just said in terms of bringing it back for adoption, that probably is, not probably, it is when they've received their permit. So that may be several months.
Meaning if this doesn't happen, then we're not, obviously, you know.
Well, I think if we could get the two projects going together, like the parking in Eastern Park.
That's our goal.
Lot upgrades, economies of scale and all that.
Okay. Future town board meetings, we have anything we want to report to anybody with that?
No, I think there was a little discussion about maybe bringing some of the subdivision standards back for a future meeting, for a future work session. So we have April 6th, right now is wide open, so based on the reports and such and direction tonight, I assume that's kind of where we'll put that.
Okay. You think the one on this next week, the land use code update, that will take the whole time?
Well, I think it's gonna take a while, Mayor, and
Okay.
I don't know that we're gonna have enough time. I guess it depends on the board's direction tonight. But I think depending on the direction you give us, we may not be ready to bring that back on March 16th. For
Okay.
example, like if you want to solicit more input from the development community, we wouldn't really have enough time to do that by March 16th. So I think that April date will give us a little bit more time to effectuate that.
Okay. So with that, I think we have ample time to get upstairs to do the current board, because we have an executive session after the meeting. So let's get up there at about 1:15 and get started.
We'll do the next one then when he makes himself super.